That night, the rain fell softly over the rose garden. Rose Hawthorne, the powerful CEO of Hawthorne and Vale, lay curled on a white leather sofa, her silk dress slipping off one shoulder, the faint scent of scotch lingering in the air. She wasn't really drunk. She was testing the black man cleaning the floors outside to see what he would do when he saw her like this. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, each beat loud against the hush of her mansion. The party guests had long since gone home, leaving the house drenched in silence and the smell of wet roses drifting through half-open windows. Rose's pulse matched the rhythm of the rain. She told herself this was just curiosity, an experiment in character. But even she could feel the edge of cruelty in what she was doing. Elias Johnson had been working for her estate only 3 months. He rarely spoke unless necessary, always polite, always focused. He didn't bow to her power the way others did. Perhaps that was why she noticed him at all. A woman who lived in glass towers and boardrooms had no business noticing the quiet man who trimmed her hedges and repaired her fountains. Yet here she was, bare-shouldered and pretending to be asleep, waiting to see if decency still existed. The door creaked softly. Heavy boots stepped onto the marble floor. "Miss Hawthorne?" His voice was deep, careful. "There's a draft in here. May I close the window?" She didn't answer. He moved closer. She heard the swish of a wet jacket, the faint clatter of tools being set aside. He saw the spilled drink on the table, the wallet, the gold watch, the unguarded woman draped across white leather. For a long moment, he didn't move. Rose's breathing slowed, her eyelids barely open. In that silence she heard everything, the rain outside, his steady exhale, the creak of the floorboard beneath his weight. Then, the softest sound, fabric shifting. Something warm brushed her arm. His jacket, heavy canvas, smelling of rain and cedar, was placed gently over her shoulders. He pulled the strap of her dress back into place, careful not to touch her skin, and adjusted the corner of the throw pillow beneath her head. "Lock the window before you catch a cold," he murmured. The latch clicked. A piece of paper landed softly on the table beside her, the scratch of a pen fading as he turned to leave. The door closed. The rain went on. Rose opened her eyes. The note lay within reach. His handwriting was neat, deliberate. "The wind is shifting east. The old frame might crack, better call maintenance in the morning. Nothing else." No attempt to take what wasn't his, no glance beyond what respect allowed. She sat up slowly, his jacket slipping down her arm, rough fabric against her bare skin. The smell of soil and rain filled her lungs, grounding her more than the whiskey ever had. For years, she'd believed everyone had a price. Power taught her that trust was a luxury for fools. Yet this man, this gardener, had been given temptation wrapped in silk and scotch, and had chosen kindness instead. She laughed quietly, the sound half broken. "You pass, Mr. Johnson," she whispered, though guilt prickled her throat. What kind of woman set traps for decency? Outside, lightning flashed over the glass conservatory. Through the wide window she could see him again, working beneath the downpour, securing the tarps over the rosebeds so the petals wouldn't drown. Every movement was purposeful, as if the storm itself had to obey him. She pressed her palm to the glass, feeling the chill. The man outside and the woman inside lived in different worlds, his bound by labor and quiet strength, hers by power and loneliness, but something about that small act had bridged them. She closed the curtain before the thought could grow. Upstairs, she poured herself another inch of scotch, then stopped halfway and poured it back. Her reflection in the dark window looked older, wearier. She slipped his note into her desk drawer and left the jacket draped over a chair where she could see it from her bed. The thunder rolled again. Somewhere beyond the garden, he was still working. She whispered to the empty room, "Maybe I was the one being tested." When morning came, the world smelled of wet earth and fresh beginnings. From her window, she watched Elias push a wheelbarrow across the glistening paths, his sleeves rolled up, his focus steady. He didn't look toward the house. He didn't need to. Rose touched the jacket resting on the chair, feeling a strange calm. For the first time in years, she wondered if power meant anything at all when kindness could disarm her so completely. The night's test was over, but something new had begun, a quiet crack in the armor of a woman who thought she could never be surprised again. The morning after the storm, the air over Greenwich carried a strange calm, the kind that comes when the world has been washed clean. Rose Hawthorne stood at the edge of her terrace, coffee cup in hand, watching the gardener below. Elias Johnson was already at work, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the early sun catching the faint sheen of rain still clinging to his arms. He didn't look up, not once. She had watched him long enough to know that he wouldn't. Everything he did was quiet, deliberate, efficient. He was the kind of man who vanished into his work, leaving only results behind. It irritated her, that composure. It also drew her in. She turned away from the window when her phone buzzed. "Morning, Rose," came Grant Cole's voice, smooth but sharp beneath the pleasantries. "The board wants your final proposal for the Century Garden project, and there's talk that you've been spending too much time at the estate. People think you're distracted." Rose's jaw tightened. "The garden is part of the brand, Grant. Heritage, sustainability, beauty, remember? The things investors pretend to care about?" Grant chuckled. "Sure. Just don't give them something else to talk about. You know how they get." The line went dead. She took a sip of her coffee, but it had gone cold. Distracted. Maybe she was. The night before kept replaying in her mind the weight of his jacket, the steadiness in his voice, the way he had pulled the strap of her dress back without lingering. No hesitation, no arrogance, just respect. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. Later that morning, Rose made her way down the gravel path to the garden, the sound of her heels out of place among the birds and bees. Elias looked up briefly, startled. "Morning, ma'am," he said, removing his cap. His eyes flicked once toward her, then away again. "The storm didn't hurt the roses much. I'll have the damaged branches pruned by noon." "Thank you," she replied. "You handled yourself well last night." His brows furrowed, unsure if she meant the work or the encounter in the living room. She didn't clarify. "I appreciate how careful you were with the house," she added. "And with me." He nodded once, his face unreadable. "It was just part of the job." "No," she said a little too quickly. "It wasn't." He hesitated, then went back to his work. She watched as his hands moved through the soil, precise and practiced, almost tender. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. "Gardening? Landscaping?" "Since I left construction. Too much noise. The garden's quieter." "And before that?" "Before that there was the Navy," he said simply. "My mother says the sea taught me patience. She was wrong. It taught me how little patience the world has for people like me." His tone wasn't bitter, just matter of fact. She found herself staring. "People like you?" He met her gaze this time, steady, unflinching. The kind no one sees until something's broken. She had no response. The words hit harder than he intended. When she returned to the house, Grant was waiting in the foyer, his suit immaculate as always. "You shouldn't be down there talking to staff," he said quietly, following her to the study. "It blurs lines. The board already has questions." "About what?" "About him. About you. Rose, you know how this looks." "How it looks," she repeated, her voice sharpening. "He works for me." I thanked him. "He's a black man working in a white woman's house, alone, after hours. You can imagine what people will say." The words were venom, and yet he said them like he was discussing the weather. She set her cup down so forcefully the porcelain cracked. "Get out, Grant. I'm trying to protect you," he said, lowering his voice. "Scandals destroy CEOs faster than market crashes. Remember your husband? People still talk about that." Her throat tightened. "Leave." He did, but not before giving her a look of quiet satisfaction. That evening, Rose sat by the window again, watching Elias load tools into his truck. His movements were slow today, almost tired. For a moment, she considered going down, saying anything to counter the poison Grant had poured into the air. But what could she say? "I don't care what they think." It would sound like pity, and pity was worse than cruelty. The next morning she found herself driving into the old section of town. On the edge of a quiet street stood a small, weathered house surrounded by patchy grass. She'd asked the estate manager for his address under the pretense of signing some garden papers. When she stepped out of her car, she heard a woman's voice humming faintly from inside. She knocked once. The door opened to reveal an elderly woman, frail but sharp-eyed. "You must be Mrs. Johnson," Rose said. I know who you are," the woman interrupted with a thin smile. "Elias said the lady from the big house might stop by one day. He didn't say why." Rose hesitated. "I wanted to thank him properly. He's a remarkable worker. Mrs. Johnson chuckled softly. He's a good man, child, but the world don't always know what to do with good men who look like him. Rose felt her face warm. He doesn't talk much about himself. He doesn't have to. When you spend your life being doubted, you learn silence keeps you safe. The old woman coughed, gripping the doorframe for balance. Rose instinctively stepped forward, offering an arm. Are you all right? Parkinson's, she said. The shaking's worse when it rains. Her smile returned, weak but warm. Don't worry. Elias keeps me steady. On her way back to the car, Rose paused by the small patch of garden in front of the house, rows of struggling herbs and a few wild lavender plants. She crouched and touched one of the blossoms. You're not supposed to bloom this time of year, she whispered. When she returned to the estate, she carried with her something she hadn't felt in a long time: humility. Elias was trimming the hedge by the fountain when she approached. Your mother's lovely, she said softly. His hands froze. You went there? I wanted to thank her for raising a man who still believes in decency. He looked away, jaw tight. That wasn't your place, Miss Hawthorne. Maybe not, she admitted, but someone had to remind me of mine. He stared at her for a long time, unreadable, then nodded once and returned to his work. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. You shouldn't drive alone out there. Not everyone's kind to strangers. Are you warning me? She asked, almost smiling. I'm reminding you, he said, that kindness can be dangerous too. That night, the storm clouds gathered again, rolling in from the coast. From her study, Rose could hear the distant rumble of thunder and the faint hum of Elias's truck pulling away down the drive. She looked at the empty chair where his jacket had hung for days. For reasons she couldn't explain, she draped it over her shoulders once more. Outside, lightning flickered over the garden, revealing for an instant the lone figure of Elias walking through the rain. She whispered to herself, barely audible, he's right, kindness can be dangerous. And as thunder echoed over the house, Rose Hawthorne realized she wasn't sure if she wanted to be safe anymore. The following week unfolded beneath a thin veil of tension that neither of them spoke about. Rose Hawthorne moved through her days with calculated poise, her face unreadable in the glass walls of boardrooms and conference calls. Yet every so often, when her mind drifted, she saw Elias's eyes steady, unflinching, carrying the quiet weight of something she hadn't named. Outside her office window, the autumn trees were shedding their last colors. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and restraint. The Centennial Garden proposal, Grant Cole said, tapping the folder on her desk. We need a public face for it, a human story. The board thinks showcasing the restoration at the estate could boost the company's image. Rose looked up from the papers. A public event? A charity gala, Grant replied, his smile thin. You'll give a speech, maybe invite the press to tour the gardens. It'll remind everyone that Hawthorne and Vale still stands for integrity and tradition. She considered it. The garden had become her refuge, her one quiet rebellion against the noise of the corporate world. Opening it to strangers felt invasive, yet the idea of letting people see what Elias had built stirred something inside her. Fine, she said. We'll do it next month. Grant nodded but lingered a moment too long. Just make sure the staff know their place that night, especially him. She didn't answer, only stared until he left. When the door closed, she exhaled. Integrity and tradition, she thought bitterly. Words men like Grant used to disguise fear. Later that afternoon, she found Elias in the conservatory, crouched over a tray of seedlings. The sunlight streamed through the glass, painting lines of gold across his skin. He didn't notice her at first, humming softly under his breath. You're early, he said without turning around. The board approved the restoration project, she said. They want a gala next month. Guests, cameras, speeches, the works. He wiped his hands on a rag, expression calm but cautious. Congratulations, ma'am. You'll be there, she added. It's your work. You deserve the credit. He shook his head. That's not my place. I decide what your place is, she said, a hint of steel in her voice. You've earned this. He looked up, meeting her eyes. People don't see it that way, Miss Hawthorne. They'll see a man like me in your garden, and they'll wonder why. Because you belong there, she said. The words came out sharper than she meant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them pulsed with something fragile and alive. I'll think about it, he said finally. That's all I ask." She left before he could change his mind. That evening, she sat on her veranda, a glass of wine untouched beside her. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the hedges Elias had trimmed that morning. She thought about his mother's house, the trembling hands, the soft voice that carried decades of endurance. There was a dignity in that family's silence, the kind that made her question her own version of strength. She had built an empire on control, but lately, control felt less like power and more like a cage. 2 days later, while she reviewed the event plans, Grant entered without knocking. "We have a problem," he said. "Elias was seen talking to one of the reporters who covered your husband's case years ago." Rose looked up sharply. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying that men like him know opportunity when they see it," Grant said, his tone low and poisonous. "Don't be naive, Rose. He could sell his story. The humble gardener, the lonely CEO, it writes itself." She stood, voice cold. "If I ever hear you speak about him or anyone like that again, you'll be out of this company before you finish the sentence." His smile was smug, infuriating. "Just trying to keep you safe." "You're dismissed," she said. He left, but the seed of unease he planted stayed. That night, unable to sleep, Rose walked barefoot into the garden. The moonlight turned the roses to silver ghosts. She found Elias near the fountain, fixing a lantern. He looked surprised to see her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. "No," she said, hugging her arms. "Too much noise in my head." He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Noise gets louder when it's quiet. You start hearing things you've ignored too long." "And what do you hear?" she asked. "Regret," he said simply. "Sometimes hope." She moved closer, the cool air sharp against her skin. "Grant said you spoke to a reporter." His jaw tightened. She asked about the restoration. "I told her nothing personal." "I don't need attention, Miss Hawthorne." "Rose," she corrected softly. He blinked, caught off guard. "You can call me Rose," she said again. "When it's just us." His gaze lingered on her for a long moment, then shifted toward the fountain. "All right, Rose." The way he said her name made her heart stumble. They stood there, the night heavy with unsaid things. "You think people can really change?" she asked finally. "Depends on what broke them," he said. "Some things mend. Some things teach you how to live with the cracks." She nodded, swallowing hard. "You sound like you've learned that firsthand." "I've learned that forgiveness is harder when it's for yourself," he said. "You?" "I'm still learning." She stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint trace of soil and rain on him. "You shouldn't trust me," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because I'm not sure I trust myself." His eyes softened. "Then maybe we both start there." For a fleeting second, she thought he might touch her. His hand twitched, then fell back to his side. The restraint made her chest ache. The following morning, the storm returned, fierce and unrelenting. The wind howled through the old trees, and the house seemed to shudder beneath the pressure. Rose was in the conservatory reviewing files when the lights flickered. Water began leaking from a cracked pane overhead. Before she could call maintenance, Elias appeared, drenched from the rain. "It's not safe here," he said. "The glass could shatter." "Then fix it," she replied, refusing to leave. "I can help." "No," he said, grabbing a ladder. "Stay back." But she didn't. Lightning flashed as he climbed, hammering new nails into the frame. A gust of wind blew through, knocking over a pot of lilies. Instinctively, she reached up to steady the ladder just as thunder cracked above them. The frame gave a loud groan, and a shard of glass fell, grazing her arm. "You're hurt," he said, jumping down, grabbing her wrist. His fingers were warm against her skin. "It's nothing," she whispered. Blood trickled down her forearm. "You could have been killed," he said, voice rising. "You shouldn't have been here." "And you shouldn't have been the one fixing it," she shot back. They stared at each other, rain dripping from his hair, her pulse hammering in her throat. "You don't understand," she said softly. "People think I'm made of stone. But you," her words faltered. He let go of her hand slowly. "I don't need to understand," he said. "I just need to make sure you don't get hurt." "You already did," she murmured. He froze, unsure what she meant. Before he could ask, she turned and walked out, leaving him standing in the storm's echo. Later, alone in her study, she cleaned the cut on her arm and stared at her reflection. The skin would heal, the bruise underneath would not. She thought of Elias, his hands, his silence, the way he'd said her name like a promise and a warning all at once. Outside, the rain eased into a steady whisper. Somewhere in that sound, she heard the truth she'd been avoiding. The test she had set for him was no longer his to pass. It was hers. Leave a number 1 inch the comments if you believe that, in that situation, you too would do the right thing like Elias, and hit subscribe if you've ever met someone who quietly did the right thing even when no one was watching, because this story is for you. The morning after the storm, the air was damp and sharp, the kind that carried the scent of earth and regret. Rose Hawthorne stood by the wide windows of her study, her arm wrapped in a fresh bandage. Outside, the world gleamed under a weak sunlight, as if the night's violence had scrubbed everything clean, but she felt no such renewal. The events in the conservatory clung to her, the lightning, the shattered glass, Elias's hand gripping hers, the tremor in his voice when he told her she could have died. It wasn't just fear she had seen in his eyes. It was something more dangerous, care. She found herself pacing, unable to focus on the numbers spread across her laptop. Her assistant's voice echoed faintly through the intercom, reminding her of the morning's board call, but Rose barely heard. Instead, she reached for her phone and dialed the maintenance office. "Is Mr. Johnson working today?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," came the answer. "He's repairing the western fence." She hesitated, then said, "Send him to my office when he's finished." An hour later, the sound of boots on the marble floor broke the stillness. Elias stood at the doorway, cap in hand, water stains on his shirt from the morning dew. "You wanted to see me? Come in," she said, her tone neutral, betraying none of the conflict twisting inside her. He stepped in, careful not to track mud across the carpet. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday," she began. "You kept your head when things went wrong." He nodded once. "That's part of the job. You also could have been seriously hurt," she continued. "You climbed up there without any safety gear. You took a risk." "So did you," he said. "That glass could have cut deeper." His eyes flicked toward the bandage on her arm. "It's nothing," she said quickly. He frowned slightly. "You always say that, don't you? When something hurts, you pretend it doesn't." The words struck deeper than he knew. She turned away, staring at the rain-speckled window. "You don't know me, Mr. Johnson." "No," he said softly, "but I know what people look like when they're lonely." The silence that followed was heavy. Rose felt something shift in her chest, an ache she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She faced him again. "I need you to help oversee the final phase of the restoration," she said briskly, deflecting. "The gala is in 3 weeks. The board wants everything perfect. You want me to coordinate?" he asked, surprised. "Yes. You know the layout better than anyone." His hesitation was clear. "Ma'am, the board won't like that." "The board answers to me," she said. "You'll report directly to me until the event is over." His jaw tightened. "If that's what you want." She gave a curt nod. "That's what I want." The days that followed carried a strange rhythm work during daylight, silence after dusk. They spent hours walking through the gardens, checking soil levels, pruning the old oaks, marking where the lighting would be placed for the gala. Each conversation began with business and ended with fragments of something else, glimpses into the lives they rarely shared. She learned about his mother's illness, about how he'd been saving for a nurse but refused to send her to a home. He learned that she hadn't spoken to her father in years, that her mother had died before seeing her succeed, and that the house she lived in felt less like home and more like a museum of her own ambition. One afternoon, while inspecting the rose beds, she caught him studying the damaged statue near the fountain, the angel with one broken wing. "You haven't replaced it," he said. "I never found one that fit," she replied. "Maybe it's better this way. Broken things can be honest." He smiled faintly. "Or maybe it reminds you of something you lost." The comment lingered between them, raw and unguarded. She wanted to tell him he was right, but instead, she said, "You think too much for a gardener, and you feel too much for someone who's trying not to." That night, she couldn't sleep. The house felt too large, too still. The rain began again, soft and steady. She wandered downstairs to the conservatory, drawn by the faint hum of the heater and the scent of wet leaves. To her surprise, Elias was there, fixing a light fixture. "You work late," she said, her voice low. He looked up, startled. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Storms make my mother nervous. I fix things to stay busy." She stepped closer. "And what do you fix when you're the one who's restless?" He gave a small smile. "I come here. The garden doesn't judge." They stood close enough for her to see the small scar on his jaw, a reminder of some long-forgotten fight or accident. "You never told me what brought you here," she said. "You could have stayed in construction." "I tried," he said quietly, "but I got tired of people yelling over me. Out here, the only thing that talks back is the wind." She laughed softly, though her chest tightened. "You make solitude sound noble." "It's not," he said. "It's survival." She didn't know why that answer hurt. Maybe because it mirrored her own truth too closely. The moment stretched too intimate, too real. When lightning flickered again outside the glass, she didn't flinch. "Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wonder what people would say if they saw us like this?" He turned to her, eyes steady. "I know what they'd say. And? They'd be wrong." The words silenced every thought she had. She took a breath, feeling the distance between them collapse. For the first time, she didn't feel like the one in control. His gaze held something unspoken, something she both feared and wanted. She broke the silence first. "Good night, Mr. Johnson." "Good night, Miss Hawthorne." Neither of them moved. Then she turned, forcing herself to leave before the moment became irreversible. Over the next few days, the house buzzed with preparations. Grant returned, overseeing logistics with a politeness so thin it was almost mocking. When he saw Elias giving directions to the lighting crew, his smile faltered. "I didn't realize the help was running the show now," he said dryly. Rose's tone was icy. "He's the project coordinator. Any problem with that?" "Only that it'll raise questions," he said. "People talk, Rose. They always do." She stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Then let them talk. Maybe they'll learn something worth repeating." That evening, as the sun set over the newly restored gardens, Rose watched from the balcony while Elias adjusted the final lanterns. The light glowed over his skin, warm and golden, and for a moment she felt a quiet sense of peace. He looked up then, meeting her eyes. No words passed between them, but the silence said enough. Later, when she walked through the halls of her mansion, she paused before the statue by the fountain. A single petal had fallen into the angel's broken hand. She traced its edge and whispered to herself, "Broken things can still hold beauty." Upstairs, the jacket still hung over the chair in her room. She draped it around her shoulders once more, not for warmth but for comfort. The scent of rain and earth lingered, a reminder of something she couldn't yet name. Outside, in the distance, the wind carried the faintest echo of his voice from the garden, giving instructions to the crew, steady and sure. And though she would never admit it aloud, Rose Hawthorne realized she had stopped listening for the approval of the world. She was listening for him. The morning of the gala arrived like a warning disguised as celebration. The estate buzzed with motion florists setting vases, caterers arranging tables, journalists trailing behind assistants with clipboards and cameras. The air smelled of roses and tension. Rose Hawthorne moved through it all with the cool authority she had perfected over years of command. Her white suit was tailored to perfection, her hair pinned immaculately, every gesture controlled. Yet beneath that composure, her stomach coiled tight. It wasn't the speech that unsettled her, nor the investors she had faced worse. It was the thought of what this night could expose, and who it could harm. Elias was by the fountain, tightening bolts on the base of the lights. He wore a dark shirt rolled to his elbows, simple slacks, nothing fancy. But when he straightened, the quiet confidence in his posture made him seem almost out of place among the servants. She caught herself staring. "Miss Hawthorne," he said when he noticed her. His tone was respectful, but his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than usual. "Everything's ready. You should be proud." "You did most of it," she replied. "They'll see that tonight." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. They'll see what they want to see." "And what's that?" she asked. "A garden they'll forget by next week," he said with a wry smile. "But it's all right. Not everything that grows is meant to be remembered." Something in his calm acceptance twisted her chest. "Do me a favor," she said softly. "Don't disappear when the speeches start." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." For a brief moment, the noise of the preparations faded. Only the sound of water from the fountain filled the space between them. Then Grant Cole appeared, interrupting like a chill wind. "Rose, the press is waiting," he said smoothly. His gaze flicked toward Elias, dismissive, almost sneering. "I'll take care of him. You have an image to maintain. That won't be necessary, she said sharply. He stays. Grant's polite smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. When he walked away, Elias muttered, he doesn't like me much. He doesn't like anyone he can't control, she said, then caught herself. You should change before the guests arrive. There's a jacket in the staff quarters. My assistant left one for you. His expression softened slightly, half amusement, half disbelief. You thought of everything. I try. By the time twilight settled over the estate, the garden had transformed into something ethereal. Strings of warm light hung between the trees, candles floated in crystal bowls across the pond, and music drifted like perfume through the air. Guests arrived in sleek cars, stepping out in silk gowns and tuxedos, their laughter brittle with champagne and ego. Rose greeted them one by one, her smile polished, her mind elsewhere. Each introduction felt like a mask tightening. Beautiful evening, miss. Hawthorne, one of the board members said, shaking her hand. You've outdone yourself. Thank you, she replied smoothly. But the credit belongs to the team. Her eyes searched for Elias among the crowd. She spotted him near the far hedge, standing with a small group of staff, now wearing a black jacket that fit a little too perfectly, as though it had been waiting for him. He caught her gaze for a moment, and that was enough. The speeches began as the last of the sunlight died. Rose stood before the gathered guests, a glass of wine in hand, the soft hum of conversation fading as she took the microphone. A century ago, she began, her voice steady. This company was founded on the idea that progress and beauty can grow side by side. Tonight, we honor that belief by restoring not just the land, but the values that shaped it: patience, care, and dignity. Her eyes flicked toward Elias. This garden was rebuilt by hands that understand both creation and humility. It reminds us that, no matter how powerful we think we are, we still depend on those who work quietly, faithfully, without applause. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Grant shifted uneasily. Rose ignored him. True beauty, she continued, doesn't shout. It simply endures. The applause that followed was polite, restrained, yet her words had weight. She stepped down, heart pounding. Later, as the guests dispersed toward the buffet, she found Elias by the stone archway, watching the lanterns sway in the breeze. You shouldn't have said that, he said quietly. Why not? Because now they're looking at me. She glanced toward the guests. Several were indeed watching, whispering behind champagne glasses. Let them, she said. You've earned the right to be seen. His expression shifted, part pride, part unease. It doesn't work that way, he said. Not for people like me. People like you? She repeated. You mean honest people? He laughed under his breath, though there was no humor in it. You really don't get it, do you? You can afford to speak about fairness. I can't even afford to believe in it. His words hit harder than he knew. I didn't mean to make things harder for you, she said softly. You didn't, he replied. You just reminded them I exist. Before she could answer, a sudden commotion rose near the dining area. Grant's voice cut through the music, loud and theatrical. Excuse me, Miss Hawthorne, but there seems to be a problem. The guests turned. Grant held up a small leather wallet. Her wallet. We found this in the staff quarters, he said. In Mr. Johnson's locker. The silence that followed was brutal. Rose froze. Elias didn't speak. His face remained calm, though his eyes darkened. That's impossible, she said, her voice low. Check again. Already did, Grant said. Perhaps you can explain how it got there. A wave of whispers rippled through the guests. Cameras shifted. Rose's pulse hammered. This is absurd, she said. You're accusing a man without proof. The proof is in my hand, Grant said smoothly. Unless you're suggesting I planted it? The crowd tensed, hungry for scandal. Elias finally spoke. It's fine, he said quietly. If they want to search, let them. No, Rose snapped. They will not. It's all right, he said again, softer this time. People see what they're ready to believe. He looked at her, eyes steady. You don't need to fight this. But she saw something break in his composure, something small and painful. Before she could stop him, he stepped forward. I'll save everyone the trouble, he said. If my being here causes discomfort, I'll go. Elias, she whispered. Don't. He met her gaze one last time, then turned and walked away through the crowd, past the flashing cameras and the murmured judgments. The rest of the evening unfolded in fragments. The press circled, questions buzzed. Grant smiled like a man who'd just won a quiet war. Rose barely remembered what she said to dismiss them all. When the last car drove off, the lights dimmed, and the garden lay in ruins of laughter and spilled wine. She walked to the fountain where Elias had worked that morning. His tools were still there, neatly arranged. The jacket she'd chosen for him hung from the edge of a chair, soaked from the rain that had started again. She picked it up and pressed it to her chest. The scent was fading, replaced by the cold emptiness of loss. Somewhere deep inside, a truth settled heavy and irrevocable she had let the world break, the only thing in her life that had felt real. The roses shuddered in the wind, their petals scattering like fragments of apology. Rose whispered into the night, "I'm sorry," but the garden, like the man who built it, gave no answer. The morning after the gala, the estate felt like a battlefield the soldiers had already abandoned. The banners and lanterns still hung, dripping with dew, but the silence was heavier than any applause from the night before. Rose Hawthorne stood by the window of her study, staring at the wet lawn below. The garden that had once been her pride looked unfamiliar, its beauty hollowed by shame. She hadn't slept. The image of Elias walking away through the crowd, calm but humiliated, replayed over and over in her mind. She had wanted to stop him, to shout his innocence, but fear had pinned her tongue. Fear of scandal, of headlines, of confirming the gossip that already swirled through every whispering guest. She had built her empire on control, and last night she'd realized how cowardice could hide inside that word. Grant entered the room without knocking. "The situation is under control," he said, setting a folder on her desk. "I've spoken to the press. The story will die in a few days." "And Elias?" she asked. "Gone," Grant replied, his tone too casual. "Packed his things before sunrise. I told security to make sure he didn't cause any trouble." Rose turned sharply, her voice low but dangerous. "Trouble? You humiliated him in front of half the board." "He humiliated himself, Rose," Grant said. "You should thank me. This could have destroyed you." "You destroyed something, but it wasn't me," she said coldly. His smirk faltered for the first time. "Be careful," he said softly. "People already think you're losing perspective. Don't make it harder for yourself." She didn't answer. She waited until he left, then closed her eyes, her breath trembling. On the table lay Elias's note from that first night, the one that said, "Lock the window before you catch a cold." She traced the words with her fingertip. He had always been the one to notice the things she ignored. That afternoon, she drove without a destination, ending up near the edge of the town where the road grew narrow and trees leaned close. The storm from the night before had left puddles in the cracked asphalt. She stopped in front of a small wooden house with faded paint. The curtains were drawn, but she could see movement inside. She hesitated before knocking. A moment later, Mrs. Mildred Johnson opened the door. Her hands trembled more than before, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "I thought I might see you," she said softly. "Elias isn't here." "I know," Rose said. I wanted to see if you were all right." "You mean, if he's all right?" the old woman said, her voice kind but pointed. Rose didn't deny it. "He didn't do what they said," she whispered. "I know," Mrs. Johnson said simply. "He told me what happened, said it wasn't your fault." "It was," Rose said, her voice breaking. "I didn't stop it. I let them believe it." The woman looked at her for a long moment, then gestured toward a worn wooden chair by the porch. "Sit," she said. "You look like someone who hasn't breathed in days." Rose obeyed. The old woman folded her shaking hands in her lap. "You know," she said quietly, "when Elias was little, he used to come home with bruises from the boys at school. They said things to him I won't repeat. One day I told him to fight back. He said, 'Ma, they don't hate me because they know me. They hate me because they never will.'" Her eyes glistened. "He's lived his whole life walking through storms that weren't his to start." Rose's throat tightened. "Where did he go?" "South," she said. "A friend runs a community farm near Charleston. Said he wanted quiet work, someplace his mother could rest." "Will he come back?" The old woman smiled faintly. "He doesn't go backward, honey, but that doesn't mean he forgets." Rose looked down at her hands, the white skin against the dark wood of the chair, the contrast so stark it hurt. "I thought I was testing him," she said. "Turns out I was testing myself." "And what did you learn?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "That kindness costs more than power," Rose whispered. The woman nodded. Then maybe you're finally worth the man you lost. When Rose returned to the estate, the sky had turned gray again. The staff avoided her eyes, and Grant was nowhere to be found. The fountain had stopped running, the water sat still, reflecting the broken angel statue beside it. She walked to the garden, her heels sinking into the soft soil. The smell of lavender lingered faintly in the air. On the bench near the rose bed, she noticed something folded beneath a small stone, a piece of paper, smudged by rain. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Didn't want to leave without saying thank you. You taught me that even the powerful can be kind. Don't let them take that from you. Take care of the garden. It listens. She pressed the note to her chest, eyes burning. That night, she called an emergency board meeting. The members appeared on screen, polished and skeptical. Grant sat across from her, confident as ever. "I know what this is about," he began. "You want to fire me." "No," she said. "I want to expose you." His smile faltered. "Excuse me?" She leaned forward. "You planted that wallet, Grant. You orchestrated the scene. I had the security footage reviewed. The timestamp doesn't lie." The board members shifted uncomfortably. "Rose," one began, "these are serious accusations. So is destroying a man's life to protect a rumor," she said sharply. "Mr. Cole acted without authorization. Effective immediately, he's terminated." She turned to Grant. "Get out of my company." He opened his mouth to protest, but the silence on the call told him the fight was lost. He stood slowly, his expression curdled with disbelief. "You're making a mistake." "I already did," she said. "I'm fixing it." He left without another word. When the meeting ended, she stayed in the empty boardroom long after the lights dimmed. The hum of the city outside felt distant, unreal. For the first time in years, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt free and terrified. Weeks passed. Winter arrived quietly, laying frost over the garden. Rose worked in silence, her days divided between meetings and long walks among the sleeping roses. Sometimes she would stop by the fountain, running her fingers along the cold stone of the broken angel, whispering to it as if it could hear. "He said it listens," she would murmur. And sometimes, when the wind rustled through the leaves, she almost believed it did. One evening, while reviewing reports, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice, soft with a southern drawl, came through. "Is this Miss Hawthorne? This is Grace Miller from Charleston. I run the Evergreen Community Farm. Elias Johnson works here." Rose's heart stilled. "Is he?" "He's fine," the woman said quickly. "But his mother passed last week. Peaceful. He asked me to call you, said you should know." Rose closed her eyes, the room spinning. Did he say anything else?" "Just that she told him to forgive himself, and maybe forgive you too." Rose pressed a hand to her mouth. "Thank you," she whispered. When the call ended, she stood in the silence of her office, staring out at the dark garden below. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the roses white. She thought of Elias standing somewhere far away, maybe under the same snow, maybe not. She whispered his name once, softly, as if the night could carry it to him. That night, she placed his note back in the drawer with care. The words had faded slightly, but the meaning remained. "Take care of the garden. It listens." She touched the glass of the window, her reflection blurred by frost, and said quietly, "I will." Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender. It was the first time she smiled in months. She didn't know when or if she'd see him again. But for the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. The garden still listened. And somewhere out there, she hoped, so did he. The winter months passed like a slow confession. Snow covered the Hawthorne estate in a pale hush, softening even the cold edges of the world she had built. Rose moved through her house like someone relearning how to live. Without Elias, the silence was different, heavier, almost sentient. She would catch herself glancing toward the garden from her office window, half expecting to see him walking the paths with his steady stride, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. But there was only frost and the echo of what she had lost. The board had quieted after Grant's dismissal. The scandal had faded, but not the guilt. Rose worked long hours, though not for power anymore. There was a different urgency now, a need to make something good from the ruin she'd caused. She set up a small scholarship fund for young landscapers from underprivileged communities, naming it after Mildred Johnson. It was the least she could do, but it didn't feel like enough. Nothing did. One morning in late February, the mail arrived in a small bundle. Among contracts and reports was an envelope with no return address. Her name was written in familiar, careful handwriting. She tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "The garden here is different. The soil is red, the air salt sweet. The kids from the shelter come to plant on weekends. They remind me of what work should be quiet, honest. My mother is gone now. She went the way she wanted, at home, with music playing. She told me not to close my heart. I think she meant you. Hope the roses are still alive. E." Rose read it 3 times before sitting down, her hand pressed against her chest as if to steady her heart. He was alive. He was healing. The thought brought a strange kind of ache, part joy, part longing. That night, she went out to the garden and stood beneath the broken angel statue, the snow crunching softly under her boots. "He forgave me," she whispered to the air. "Now what do I do with that?" The angels said nothing, but the wind moved through the roses like a sigh. The next morning, she called her assistant. "Book me a flight to Charleston," she said. "I need to see someone." The assistant hesitated. "Is this business related, Miss Hawthorne?" "No," Rose said. "It's human related." The Evergreen Community Farm lay just outside Charleston, surrounded by low fields and sunlight that seemed to hum. The air was warmer there, heavy with the scent of soil and life. When she stepped out of the car, she saw children running through rows of green, laughter cutting through the air like birdsong. And then she saw him. Elias was kneeling beside a row of seedlings, helping a boy tie string between stakes. His sleeves were rolled up, his skin bronzed by the southern Sunday. He looked different, older, calmer, but the steadiness was still there. She stood watching until he turned, sensing her before she spoke. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he said quietly, "I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I," she said. "But I got your letter." "And you read it?" he said, half smiling, 3 times. He nodded, glancing toward the children. "This place doesn't care who you used to be. You work, you grow, you let things heal. And have you?" she asked. "Healing isn't the same as forgetting," he said. "But it's a start." She stepped closer, sunlight catching her hair. "I fired Grant," she said softly. "Publicly." He raised an eyebrow. "Did it help?" "Not really," she admitted. "It doesn't bring back what was taken." "It's something," he said. "That's more than most people do." They walked the field together, the sound of their footsteps sinking into the soft earth. "Your mother's fund is helping people," she said after a while. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I did," she replied, "because she believed in decency, even when I didn't." "My mother believed in grace," he said quietly. "She thought it was stronger than justice." Rose looked at him, her eyes softening. "Was she right?" "Ask me when I stop being angry," he said, though there was no bitterness in his tone, only truth. "I don't blame you," he added after a pause. "Not anymore." "I wish you did," she said. "It'd be easier to live with." He smiled faintly. "You always did like control." She laughed, a sound that startled them both. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he said. As the sun began to set, painting the fields gold, she asked, "Do you ever miss it? The estate, the gardens?" He looked at the horizon. "Sometimes, but here, I get to build without anyone looking over my shoulder." "I wasn't always looking over your shoulder," she teased. "Sometimes you were watching," he said. "That's different." His words made her breath catch. "And did you mind?" "No," he said. "I just didn't know what it meant." She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "It meant I trusted you more than I trusted myself." "That's dangerous," he said. "So is kindness," she replied. He smiled at that, the same quiet smile that had undone her the first time. "You haven't changed much," he said. "Neither have you." "I had to," he said. "The world doesn't move for men like me unless we start pushing." The last light faded, and the children went home. They stood together near the fence, the air turning cool. "You'll stay for dinner?" he asked. "If I'm invited." "You always were," he said. They ate under the porch light, the meal simple but warm. For a while, they talked about nothing: books, music, the strange peace of rural life. When the conversation slowed, she said, "You could come back, you know. I could find a position for you at the foundation." Something that matters. Everything matters, he said. Even the small things, especially the small things. Then come back and show me how, she said. You don't belong hidden out here. Maybe not, he said, but I belong somewhere I'm not doubted. The words stung, but she understood. I doubted the world, not you, she said quietly. And that's the same thing. He looked at her then, long enough that she almost forgot to breathe. Rose, he said finally, his voice low, if I come back, it won't be as your employee. Her pulse quickened. Then as what? As someone who won't be owned by your guilt, he said, or your loneliness. She nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. I wouldn't want it any other way. Then maybe, he said, one day I'll come back. She smiled faintly. Don't take too long. When she left that night, he walked her to the car. The stars above the fields shimmered like scattered glass. As she reached for the door, he said, You really came all this way just to see me? No, she said. I came to see if hope was still alive. And? It is, she said. It's standing right in front of me. He looked down, shaking his head, but she saw the flicker of warmth in his eyes. Drive safe, he said, and Rose, lock the window before you catch a cold. She laughed softly, tears stinging her eyes. You still remember. Some things are worth remembering, he said. Then he stepped back, watching as she drove away, the red glow of her taillights fading into the dark. That night, as she crossed the bridge out of Charleston, Rose rolled down the window and let the wind rush through her hair. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't running from guilt or chasing redemption. She was simply driving toward possibility. The road stretched ahead, endless and open, and for the first time since the night of the storm, she whispered his name not as an apology but as a promise. Spring came late that year, creeping quietly into Connecticut as though uncertain it was welcome. The roses bloomed again, defiant and wild, stretching across the garden that had once been Elias Johnson's domain. Rose Hawthorne moved among them in the early mornings, pruning stems herself, gloved hands steady, her white blouse streaked with soil. It had become her ritual, an act of remembrance, maybe of penance. The board thought it unbecoming for a CEO to kneel in the dirt, but she no longer cared. The garden had outlived scandal, gossip, and the hollow noise of society's judgments. It was still beautiful, still alive. She wondered if he knew that. Every now and then, she would catch herself imagining him there again, the way he'd stand beneath the oaks, sun slipping through the leaves, his calm voice explaining how soil remembered touch. She could still hear him say it, "The garden listens." It always did, and lately, she swore it listened to her grief. One morning, while reviewing charity proposals in her office, her assistant appeared at the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. He didn't give a name. "Tell them to schedule an appointment," Rose said distractedly. "He said you'd want to see him," the assistant added. Something in her tone made Rose look up. "Send him in." When the door opened, the air seemed to shift. Elias stood there, leaner, darker from the southern sun, but unchanged in the ways that mattered. He removed his cap, eyes steady but unreadable. "You look surprised," he said. Rose managed a breath. "I thought you weren't coming back." "I wasn't," he said simply. "Then I saw the article about your scholarship fund. Mildred would have liked that." "I did it for her," Rose said softly, "and for you." "Do I need forgiving?" "No," she said, "I do." His gaze softened. "Maybe we both did." She gestured toward the chair across from her. "Please, sit." He did, though his posture stayed cautious, like a man not sure whether he was visiting an old friend or reopening a wound. "How long are you staying?" she asked. "That depends," he said. "Charleston's good to me, but Grace, the woman who runs the farm, she says, I need to face unfinished things before I can plant new ones." "And you think I'm one of them?" she asked. "I know you are," he replied quietly. The room felt smaller then, heavy with words unsaid. "The garden's still yours, you know," she said finally. "Nothing's changed there." "Everything's changed," he said. "You just learned to listen to it." His voice carried no bitterness, only truth. "Come see," she said impulsively. "It's still your work. You should see what it's become." They walked side by side through the garden. The air smelled of earth and rain. The angel statue still stood by the fountain, its broken wing untouched. "I kept it that way," Rose said. "You once told me some things shouldn't be fixed." "I said some things teach you how to live with the cracks," he corrected, smiling faintly. You took it further. Maybe because I learned from the best, she said. He crouched, brushing his fingers across the soil, then stood, looking toward the hills where the oaks met the horizon. You added lavender, he said, for forgiveness. I wasn't sure it would grow in this climate, she admitted. It's thriving, he said. Resilient things usually do. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of the flowers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They still talk about that night, she said at last. The gala, the scandal. It's quieter now, but the memory's still there. People like to keep others in the boxes they build for them. Boxes are safer than the truth, he said. They don't change shape, but you left yours, she said. You built something better, only because I had to, he said. You gave me no choice. The honesty in his tone didn't wound her. It steadied her. And now, she asked. Now I'm here because I don't want to hate the place that made me learn who I am, he said. I don't want to hate you either. Then don't, she whispered. Stay. He looked at her then, really looked, the way he used to, as if searching for something buried deep. You don't need me here, Rose. You've got everything. Except peace, she said. You have that. Peace doesn't live in people like us, he said. We chase it, and maybe, if we're lucky, it stops for a while to let us breathe. She smiled faintly. Then let it stop here, just for today. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave. As the sun dipped low, she led him to the veranda where dinner had been set. You planned this, he said. I hoped, she replied. Hoping isn't planning. It's the only thing that ever kept me alive, she said. They ate quietly. The candlelight softened the distance between them. Grant tried to sell his story to the press last month, she said suddenly. I stopped it. You didn't have to. I did, she said, because what he said about you wasn't true. You already knew that, he said gently. You just had to believe it. And now I do. He looked down at his hands. Belief's a strange thing. When I lost my mother, I stopped believing in fairness. When you tried to help me, I stopped believing in motives. But then I watched the kids at the farm, how they plant seeds knowing storms will come anyway. That's belief. And you came here to tell me that? She asked. No, he said. I came here because I realized storms aren't always bad. They clear the air. For a while, they sat in silence, the kind that wasn't awkward but full. Then he asked, why didn't you remarry? Because love, for me, always came with a contract, she said. You broke that rule. I didn't know how to start over. You just did, he said softly. The wind caught her hair, brushing it across her face. You should know, he added. Grace offered me a position to expand the farm's outreach program. We're building gardens in public schools. I came here to invite you to help. Me? You've got money, connections, and guilt, he said, smiling gently. That's a good combination for change, she laughed. You haven't lost your honesty. It's all I've got, he said. When we start building in the city, we'll need funding and visibility. You could put your name behind it. No, she said. I'll put yours. He looked surprised. Why? Because it's time the world learned what decency looks like when it stands on its own. The sky deepened into twilight. The garden shimmered beneath the last light, the fountain reflecting the glow of the stars. Rose reached for his hand, hesitating just long enough to give him a choice. He didn't pull away. I used to think kindness made people weak, she said quietly. You proved me wrong. Kindness isn't weakness, he said. It's resistance. She smiled through tears she didn't bother to hide. Then stay, and help me rebuild what we both lost. He studied her face for a long moment. I'll stay, he said finally, if we build something honest this time. No more masks, she said. No more tests. Then it's a deal. They stood together as the stars came out, the night wrapping them in quiet. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of titles or expectations, only the gravity of a man who had every reason to walk away and chose not to. When he left that night, he didn't say goodbye. He only looked back once, his silhouette framed by moonlight, and she knew he would return. The garden had listened long enough. Now, it was ready to speak again. Upstairs, Rose opened the drawer of her desk and found his old note. She read it once more. Take care of the garden. It listens. Then she added her own line beneath it. It answered. Summer rolled in with the kind of warmth that felt almost forgiving. The Hawthorne estate, once a monument to isolation, now pulsed with life again. Children from local schools arrived on weekends, their laughter echoing across the gardens as they learned how to plant, to prune, to listen. The community outreach program had begun quietly, but spread fast. One news outlet after another praised the partnership between Rose Hawthorne and Elias Johnson. They called it the Garden of Second Chances. The phrase stuck. Rose had resisted at first, but when she saw the way Elias smiled at it, tired but proud, she accepted it. It wasn't about reputation anymore. It was about redemption made visible. The first time Elias returned to stay, it was almost unspoken. He arrived early one morning with a truck full of seedlings and 2 boxes of tools. "There's a lot to do," he said. "Good," Rose replied. "Then we'll start." They worked side by side in the soil, as if the world had never broken them, and yet it had. Perhaps that's what made the rebuilding feel sacred. In the weeks that followed, the house changed as much as the garden. The halls, once silent, now filled with footsteps, voices, the smell of coffee, and the faint hum of music from the kitchen. Rose had hired new staff from the local community, many of them single mothers and veterans who'd lost jobs during the pandemic. Elias trained them himself, patient and soft-spoken, teaching them how to tend soil like tending wounds with care, not pity. Watching him, Rose felt something in her heart begin to grow roots again. She hadn't realized how much of her life had been spent managing, not living. One afternoon, while pruning near the fountain, she found him repairing the broken angel statue. "I thought you said to leave it," she said, teasing. He looked up, a streak of dust across his cheek. "I said some cracks teach you how to live. I didn't say they shouldn't heal. So now you're healing angels? Only the stubborn ones," he said, and his grin caught her off guard. She laughed, something she hadn't done freely in years. He noticed, and for a fleeting moment, the air between them changed thicker, warmer, filled with the quiet knowledge of everything they had both left unsaid. That night, there was a dinner for donors. The veranda glowed with candles, the hum of polite conversation mingling with the sound of cicadas. Rose looked impeccable, as always, sleek black dress, diamonds understated but deliberate. Elias stood near the edge of the crowd, dressed simply but commanding attention all the same. Some of the older guests gave him the kind of lingering looks that carried old prejudice. Rose saw them, so did he. When she introduced him as her co-founder, the silence was sharp. Then one man, a retired senator, raised a glass. "To progress," he said with a strained smile. In all its unexpected forms, the words were meant as a half-insult, but Rose took them as a challenge. She lifted her glass. "To decency," she replied. "It takes more courage than power ever will." The moment passed, but its weight lingered. Later, as the guests left and the night grew quiet, Elias said softly, "You didn't have to defend me." "Yes," she said, "I did. Not because you need it, but because they do." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not the same woman who once tested me." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I finally became the one I was pretending to be." The following days blurred into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. They worked, they planned, they argued about irrigation and funding. But beneath it all ran a current neither of them could ignore. The line between gratitude and love had blurred, and they both knew it. Still, neither dared name it. It was safer that way, or so they thought. Until one evening in July, when a summer storm rolled in without warning. Rain poured over the estate, drumming on the glass roof of the conservatory where they had once met, once tested, once almost broken each other. Elias was inside, securing tools from the wind. Rose entered, soaked from running across the garden. "You shouldn't be out there," he shouted. "The lightning." "I've faced worse storms," she said, breathless, water dripping from her hair. "Besides, I didn't want you to face this one alone." He stared at her, stunned. Then something in him cracked. "You think I'm still that man waiting for your approval? I left that behind." "No," she said. "I think you're the only man I've ever respected enough to face honestly." "Then be honest," he said. "What do you want from me?" She hesitated, the truth heavy on her tongue. "Peace," she whispered. "And maybe forgiveness." "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for," he said quietly. "It's something you live worthy of." "Then teach me how," she said. The rain intensified, beating against the glass like a drum. He took a step toward her, close enough that she could see the raindrops glistening on his skin. "You don't need me for that," he said. "I need you because you remind me I'm human," she said. "Because when you're near, I stop trying to prove my worth to the world." His expression softened, the fight in his shoulders dissolving into something gentler. "You always had worth, Rose. You just buried it under walls." "Then break them," she said. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. "You really want to start this?" "It already started," she said. "The night I pretended to sleep." The silence that followed was its own confession. Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, something just as bright and dangerous flickered between them. When his lips met hers, it wasn't the impulsive surrender of two people seeking escape, it was the slow, inevitable joining of two souls that had already walked through hell and found each other still standing. The kiss was brief, tender, and heavy with everything they'd never said. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his chest, her breath trembling. "We'll be judged," she whispered. "We already were," he said. "The difference is, this time, we choose the verdict." The storm passed by midnight. The air was thick with the smell of rain and roses. They stood in the doorway of the conservatory, watching the clouds drift apart, moonlight filtering through. "You'll stay?" she asked. "For now," he said. "As long as the garden needs tending. And after? We'll see." It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. In the days that followed, whispers spread. The media noticed the closeness between them again, the way she looked at him during interviews, the ease with which he spoke beside her. Some headlines were kind, others cruel, but neither of them cared. They had stopped living for approval. Instead, they focused on the project, their project. The Garden of Second Chances expanded to 5 more cities. They hired hundreds, helped thousands, and changed quiet corners of forgotten places into fields of life. When they stood together at the opening of the Chicago branch, a reporter asked, "Miss Hawthorne, is this redemption?" She smiled. "No," she said. "This is love disguised as work." That night, after the cameras left, Elias turned to her and said softly, "You didn't have to say that." "It's the truth," she said. "And truth is the only thing that's ever made me free." He nodded slowly. "Then let's keep living it." She took his hand without fear, without hesitation. The crowd behind them blurred, the lights softened, and for the first time since the night of the storm years ago, the world finally felt quiet. The garden had taught them both how to listen now. It was teaching them how to grow. Autumn arrived quietly, draping the estate in shades of amber and gold. The air turned cooler, sharper, carrying the faint scent of earth and endings. But for Rose Hawthorne, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of a season she could finally breathe in without guilt. The Garden of Second Chances had become more than a program. It was a movement. Newspapers called it a revolution in compassion, though she and Elias never saw it that way. For them, it was simply work, soulful, necessary work. They traveled often now, visiting community gardens across the country, standing side by side in places where hope used to feel like a rumor. Every time she saw him speak to a crowd, humble yet resolute, she remembered that first night she'd tested him, pretending to sleep just to see if his decency was real. Now she knew. It had always been. One late afternoon, they were back in Connecticut. The sky hung low with rain clouds, but the air was still warm. Rose stood by the veranda, watching volunteers finish packing up from the day's event. Elias was at the fountain, his hands in the soil again, coaxing the last of the season's roses into bloom. "You'll ruin that shirt," she called out. He glanced up, smiling. "Some things are worth ruining for," he said. "I've learned not to argue with you," she replied, stepping closer. "Then you're learning faster than I did," he said, eyes soft with amusement. She leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the garden. "It's strange," she said. "I spent half my life building walls around this place, and now it belongs to everyone." "That's what makes it beautiful," he said. "You let it breathe." "And what about us?" she asked. "Are we still learning to breathe?" He set down his trowel and looked at her, really looked. "I think we've been holding our breath for years," he said. "Maybe it's time we exhaled." That night, they had dinner together in the conservatory, the same room where everything had once begun and nearly ended. The glass roof reflected the flicker of candlelight. Rain tapped gently above them, steady and rhythmic. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "Every time it rains," he said, "but not how you think. I don't remember the test. I remember the way you looked at me when you realized you didn't need to pretend anymore." She smiled faintly. "You remember too much. You forget too little," he said softly. "That's what makes us even." They ate quietly for a while, the silence comfortable. "I'm selling the company," she said suddenly. He froze, setting down his fork. "You're what?" "I've been thinking about it for months. The board can handle it without me. My life isn't in the boardroom anymore." "And where is it?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Wherever you are." His breath caught. "Rose, you once told me that peace doesn't live in people like us," she said. "Maybe it's time we proved ourselves wrong." He leaned back, searching her face. "You'd walk away from all of that for this?" "I already did," she said quietly. "The day I chose to believe in something other than power." He shook his head, not in disbelief but in awe. "You changed," he said. "No," she said. "You just showed me who I could be." Later, after dinner, they stepped outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the garden glistening under the moonlight. The roses shimmered like glass. "There's something I need to show you," he said, leading her toward the fountain. Beside the angel statue, a small bronze plaque had been set into the stone. She knelt to read it, in memory of Mildred Johnson, who taught her son and the world that grace is stronger than pride. Rose's eyes blurred with tears. "When did you do this?" she whispered. "A few weeks ago," he said. "I wanted her to stay here. She'd like knowing the woman who once tested me tends the garden she believed in." "She'd say you forgave too much," Rose murmured. "She'd say I finally forgave enough," he replied. The wind moved gently through the roses, carrying the scent of rain and life. Rose turned to him, her heart full. "Elias, what are we now?" He smiled. "Two people who stopped running from what they feel." "That's not very poetic," she teased. "I'm not a poet," he said. "I'm a gardener. And what do gardeners do? They plant things they might never see bloom." She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "Then plant this," she said softly. "Plant us." Time, it seemed, had finally decided to be kind. The following weeks blurred into a gentle rhythm work, laughter, late-night talks, quiet mornings over coffee and sketches of new garden layouts. The world outside still gossiped, but the noise didn't reach them anymore. They'd built something stronger than reputation, truth. One morning, a journalist came to interview them for a feature story. She asked, "Do you think people have finally moved past judging what they don't understand?" Elias smiled slightly. "People never stop judging," he said. "But they can learn to see differently," Rose added. "We're not here to prove anything. We're here to remind them that decency still grows if you tend it." The journalist nodded thoughtfully, scribbling down notes, though neither of them cared about the article. What mattered was that the words were real. That evening, they walked the garden as the sun set. The sky flared pink and orange, the air humming with crickets. "Do you ever wonder if this will last?" Rose asked. "What, us or the garden?" "Both. Everything ends," he said. "But some things leave roots deep enough to survive the winter." "Then we'll just keep planting," she said. "Until the world learns." "Learns what?" "That love doesn't ask permission." He smiled, brushing his thumb over her hand. "You're quoting me now." "Maybe I am," she said. "You make a good philosopher, Mr. Johnson. And you make a dangerous one, Miss Hawthorne." "Mrs. Johnson, one day," she said suddenly, almost without meaning to. The words slipped out like a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. He stopped walking. "You mean that?" She turned to him, eyes shining. "I wouldn't have said it if I didn't." His expression softened, breaking into a slow, disbelieving smile. Then maybe the garden wasn't the only thing that got a second chance. When autumn deepened into winter again, the roses fell into sleep beneath the frost. But the estate no longer felt empty. It felt alive, even in its stillness. Some nights, when the snow drifted down like soft ash, Rose would wake to find Elias by the window, watching the moonlight over the fields. "You can't sleep," she'd whisper. "Old habits," he'd say. "I used to stay up listening for storms. And now I listen for peace." She'd slide into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "You found it," she'd say. "No," he'd whisper. "You did. I just followed." and together they would fall back into the quiet rhythm of breathing two hearts that had learned the hardest truth of all, that love, when it survives the test of pride and pain, becomes something deeper than forgiveness. It becomes home. Winter thawed slowly that year, as if reluctant to loosen its grip on the world. The first signs of spring came in, whispers, the drip of melting ice from the roof, the faint green breaking through soil that had slept too long. Rose stood by the window of the conservatory, watching the snow retreat. The garden waited beneath it, patient and sure, just like Elias. She smiled at the thought of him. He was outside even now, sleeves rolled, hands deep in the thawing earth, coaxing new life from ground that still shivered from cold. She admired the way he worked, never rushing, never demanding. He tended life as if it were a secret shared only between him and the soil. In the months since their quiet promise to one another, they had grown into something steady, something that didn't need to be spoken aloud. They lived without titles now, not CEO and worker, not rich and poor, not white and black, but as two people who had chosen to build something real in a world that still preferred illusions. But even peace has a pulse, and one morning, it faltered. The news broke like a crack through glass. An old video from years before, from the night of the gala, had resurfaced online. Edited cruelly, stripped of context, it painted a story the public had long buried, that Rose Hawthorne had once compromised an employee, that the man she now worked beside had been rewarded for his silence. It spread like wildfire. Reporters swarmed the gates again, microphones thrust through the iron bars. Investors called for statements. The same board that had once applauded her redemption now whispered the word resignation. She sat in her office, the blinds half closed, the world pressing in like a storm she thought she'd already survived. Elias entered quietly, setting down his gloves, still dusted with soil. "I saw it," he said simply. "So did everyone," she replied. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with exhaustion. "They'll make it ugly again." "They already did," he said, walking closer. "But this time, it's not about them. It's about my name," she said bitterly. "My company. Everything I tried to rebuild." "It's about truth," he corrected. "And you've already lived it once." "You don't understand," she said. "The world will always see what it wants to see. A white woman with power, a black man with no voice. They'll rewrite it again, and they'll call it justice." "Then let them," he said. "We can't fight shadows, Rose. We can only stand where the light still reaches." She stared at him, his calmness both infuriating and anchoring. "And what if they come after you this time?" "Then they do," he said simply. "But I'm done running. Are you?" The question struck something deep in her chest. She stood, crossing the room to face him. "I've spent my whole life fighting to be respected," she said quietly. "And the one time I let myself really feel, I lost everything. I can't lose it again." "You didn't lose anything," he said. "You found something they can't take." He reached for her hand. "You found me." That night, they sat together by the fire in the old sitting room, the one her mother used to favor. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside, there was warmth. "When I was little," Rose said, "my father used to tell me that people only respect what they fear. I believed him for most of my life. I built an empire out of that fear." "And now?" Elias asked. "Now I think he was wrong. People don't respect fear, they obey it. What they respect is courage." "And what does courage look like?" he asked. She turned to him. "It looks like standing beside you when the world calls it scandal." His eyes softened. "Then be courageous." The next morning, she called a press conference. Her advisors begged her not to. The board threatened legal action, but she didn't waver. The cameras flashed as she stepped to the podium in the garden, the same place where it had all once fallen apart. Elias stood behind her, silent but steady. "Years ago," she began, "I made mistakes. I hurt people by choosing silence when truth demanded a voice. But I will not apologize for the man beside me. Elias Johnson is not my shame. He is my redemption." The crowd murmured, cameras snapping faster. "The world loves stories about power and scandal," she continued. "But this isn't that story. This is about two people who refuse to let prejudice define decency. You can judge me if you want. I'm done judging myself." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the sea of faces. "If you want to know who I am, look at what we've built together." She gestured toward the garden, the volunteers, the children planting, the women laughing under the awning. "This is my answer." When she stepped down, the reporters shouted questions, but she didn't stop to answer. Elias met her halfway, eyes shining with quiet pride. "You just burned your last bridge," he said. "Then let's build something new from the ashes," she replied. In the days that followed, the media storm raged, but the backlash she expected never came. Instead, people began to speak up, former employees, beneficiaries of the foundation, even strangers sharing how the garden project had changed their lives. The narrative began to turn. One magazine headline read, "From Scandal to Strength, the Woman Who Planted Redemption." Another simply said, "She spoke truth." For the first time, the truth wasn't a weapon. It was a seed. One evening, after the chaos began to fade, Rose found Elias sitting on the porch, watching the sunset bleed gold across the sky. "You're quiet," she said, sitting beside him. "Just thinking," he said. "About what?" "How strange it feels," he said. "To be seen for who I am, not what they made me." "You earned that," she said. "No," he replied. "We did." The light softened around them, painting their faces in amber. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not because I want to, but because I don't ever want to become comfortable with something this fragile." "You won't," she said. "You're too grounded for that." He smiled faintly. "You're the dreamer now." "Maybe," she said. "But even dreams need roots. And what if the world changes again?" "Then we plant again," she said, "until it listens." The garden below swayed in the evening breeze, the roses nodding like silent witnesses. In that moment, there was no power, no scandal, no color, only two people sitting in the afterglow of truth, their shadows stretching long against the soil they had both fought to heal. For the first time in either of their lives, the world's noise felt far away. There was only the whisper of wind through the trees and the quiet certainty that love, when grown in honesty, could weather anything, even the storm of public opinion. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, Elias turned to her and said softly, "You know what your father was wrong about?" "What's that?" she asked. "People don't respect what they fear. They respect what refuses to die." She smiled, reaching for his hand. "Then I suppose we've earned their respect." "No," he said. "We've earned our peace." And as night settled over the estate, Rose Hawthorne rested her head against his shoulder, finally unafraid of what the morning would bring. The world could write its stories, twist its truths, shout its judgments, but the garden, their garden, would outlive them all. Because some roots, once planted, never die. The years that followed unfolded not with fanfare, but with quiet grace. Time had a way of softening edges, turning wounds into weathered lines of strength. The Hawthorne estate, once a monument to isolation, had become a living emblem of rebirth. The Garden of Second Chances was no longer just a project, it was a legacy. Roses now bloomed across 10 states, in schools and shelters, on rooftops and in abandoned lots reborn into sanctuaries of color. Wherever the scent of lavender drifted, people spoke of the woman who once fell from grace and the man who helped her rise again. But for Rose and Elias, the world's recognition meant little. They had long stopped chasing applause. Their lives had settled into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Mornings spent tending the garden, afternoons planning new initiatives, and evenings walking through the grounds as the sun bled gold across the sky. They didn't speak much of the past anymore. It lived quietly between them, like the roots beneath the soil, unseen but essential. One early autumn morning, Rose stood before the old fountain, the angel's wing now fully restored. Elias had repaired it 2 years earlier, though he'd left one faint crack visible along its edge. A reminder, he'd said, that even perfection needs honesty. She touched the cool stone now, smiling faintly. The air was crisp, fragrant with earth and fading roses. Behind her, she heard the familiar sound of his boots on the gravel. "You're up early," he said, his voice still warm from sleep. "Couldn't stay in bed," she replied. "The light's too beautiful to waste," he chuckled. "You used to say that about deadlines." "That was another lifetime," she said, turning to him. "This one's better." He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and for a long moment, they just stood there, listening to the fountain. "We should go to Boston next week," he said. "The kids from the new youth center want you to visit their garden." You mean our garden, she corrected. You're the face of it now. You're the reason it exists, he said. You gave it a name. You gave it life, she whispered. He smiled, brushing his thumb across her cheek. Then I guess we're even. Later that day, they hosted a small gathering at the estate. No donors or press, just volunteers, families, and children whose hands were still stained with soil. The laughter, the smell of food, the hum of stories filled the air. Rose looked around and realized how far she'd come from the woman who once measured her worth in profit margins and headlines. She watched Elias kneel beside a group of children, showing them how to plant bulbs for next spring. The sunlight caught his profile, and something inside her swelled a love that had deepened not through passion or drama, but through constancy. When he glanced up and caught her watching, he winked, and she felt, absurdly, like the young woman she used to be. As dusk settled, they walked together to the hill overlooking the garden. From there, they could see everything, the rows of flowers, the lanterns flickering to life, the people laughing below. It's strange, she said softly. This used to be a place of pride. Now it's peace. That's what happens when you start planting for others, he said. The soil remembers. She looked at him, her eyes tender. Elias, do you ever think about the night we met? How different things could have been? He nodded slowly. All the time, but I think we were meant to find each other through the mess. Sometimes God hides grace inside mistakes. She smiled. Then we made a lot of grace, enough to fill a lifetime, he said. Maybe two. A gentle wind rose, carrying the scent of roses and rain. I have something for you, she said suddenly. She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a small box. What's this? He asked. Open it. Inside was a key, simple, silver, engraved with one word. Home. You never really moved in, she said softly. I thought maybe you should. He looked at the key for a long time, then back at her. You really want me here? For good? You've always been here, she said. This just makes it official. He closed the box, his throat tight. You know, I used to think people like us didn't get forever. Then let's prove the world wrong again, she said. He kissed her then, slow and sure, the kind of kiss that feels like a vow spoken without words. Over the next year, the world around them kept changing, as it always did. There were new challenges, climate issues affecting crops, funding delays, bureaucratic nonsense, but nothing that shook the foundation they had built. And then came the night when everything stilled again. A summer storm, fierce and sudden, not unlike the one that had once bound their fates. Lightning flashed across the sky, rain lashing against the conservatory glass. Rose stood by the window, watching the storm with a strange calm. Elias came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. You're not afraid anymore, he murmured. Not of storms, she said. They remind me how far we've come. You always did find poetry in chaos. You found meaning in it, she said. That's harder. When the storm finally passed, the air smelled clean and new. The garden glistened under the moonlight, every petal shimmering with rain. They stepped outside together, barefoot, walking through the wet grass. The roses bent under droplets, heavy but unbroken. They survived, she said softly. So did we, he replied. Maybe we were never meant to bloom easy, she said. Maybe not, he said, but we were meant to last. She looked at him, the man who had once been a test, then a mirror, then the love of her life. Elias, she whispered, if everything ended tonight, if the world forgot our names, our work, would it still matter? He smiled gently. It would, to the soil, to the seeds, to the ones who'll keep planting when we're gone. That's enough, she said. That's everything. Years later, after they were both gone, people would still come to the estate to see the garden. They would read the plaque at the fountain, two names side by side, and feel the peace that lingered in the air. The roses would keep blooming each spring, wild and faithful, their roots deep and unyielding. Some said that on quiet nights, if the wind was right, you could hear laughter between the trees, the faint murmur of two voices carried through the leaves, one strong, one soft, still tending, still teaching, still reminding the world that love, when it listens, never dies. The story of Rose Hawthorne and Elias Johnson reminds us that redemption is not found in power, wealth, or public forgiveness. It's found in the quiet courage to face our own truth. Love, when born from humility and respect, has the power to challenge prejudice, heal division, and transform even the deepest wounds into something beautiful. The garden they built was more than soil and flowers. It was proof that compassion can outlast scandal, that dignity can grow from brokenness, and that real strength lies not in control, but in kindness.